What is that smell? I am definitely getting a hint of a deal. Oh wait, it's more than a hint. Yeah, these are the best deals, and not just this season, but all year long. In all seriousness, the smartest shoppers know that you get the brands you love with the most savings and cash back with Rakuten. And I know I'm certainly interested in sniffing out those deals. Start getting cash back at your favorite stores like Urban Outfitters, Petco, even Expedia, and getting cash back doesn't mean you have to miss out on sales because those can be stacked right on top. It's easy to use and based on a simple idea. Stores pay Rakuten for sending them shoppers, and Rakuten shares the money with you as cashback through PayPal or check. Smells like a perfect deal to me. Download the free Rakuten app and never miss a deal. Or go to Rakuten.com to start getting the most bang for your buck. That's Rakuten.
At Patron, we craft our tequila using high-quality natural ingredients without additives. No sweeteners, no extracts, no secrets. In fact, Patron's secret ingredient is that we have no secret ingredients. Just 100% additive-free tequila, made with 100% Weber Blue Agave, water, and thyme. Patron, 100% additive-free tequila. Visit patrontequila.com to learn more. The perfect way to enjoy Patron is responsibly. Copyright 2025, imported by Patron Spirits Company, Coral Gables, Florida. Tequila 40% ABV.
Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne, and it is Women's History Month. March is Women's History Month, which it's sort of like I have a calendar that I have at work just for fun. But every day it's like tuna sandwiches day, or it's like hug your cat day or whatever. And I always like to know what day it is. And when there's a day that's like Red Hair People Appreciation Day, I'm like, hell yeah, that's a day for me, a person with red hair. And so for Women's History Month, it's like, hell yeah, Women's History Month. That's a month for the thing that I like to talk about, which I talk about women's history all year round, but I'm excited. I'm excited when it's Women's History Month the same way I'm excited when it's like Red Hair People Are Great Day, because it's just, I feel seen, I feel validated, and yeah. And I also feel seen and validated because guess who has been featuring Vulgar History all month as one of their women's history podcast things, and that is Amazon Music. So I just want to say thank you to Amazon Music for featuring my little podcast that I record here at my desk in my apartment in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Thank you for featuring my podcast. And hello to anyone who found this podcast from that feature. Check out Vulgar History on Amazon Music. And yeah, keep celebrating women's history all the time. I mean, listen to this podcast and you inherently are doing that. So it's all great. Today, we're going to be revisiting an episode from 2020, and here's what's interesting about this. So first of all, it's the episode about Queen Anne, who I used to always call Queen Anne from The Favorite, but that movie came out in 2018 and won some Oscars in 2019. It's faded from the public consciousness mostly, so if I say Queen Anne from The Favorite, I don't know if you know what that means anymore. But what we do have is more further context for who Queen Anne is. Queen Anne, the niece of hot Charles II. Queen Anne, the person who, because all of the children she gave birth to died, the crown of England went over to George I in Hanover, which is how we get to George II, III, and IV, aka Prinny, the husband of Caroline of Brunswick, who I wrote a book of. It's called Rebel of the Regency, the scandalous saga of Caroline of Brunswick, Britain's uncrowned queen. So the connections are all here, but also what we see in the story of Anne that you're going to hear, re-listen to, she had various health concerns that later Caroline of Brunswick had, Prinny had. Like the thing about the British royal family, not so much today, but still a little bit today, is that they kept marrying their relatives. And so that meant that the same illnesses kept going person to person, person to person. Like we did a whole season about Mary Queen of Scots, and she had various health problems. Mary Queen of Scots, her son, baby James, James the 1st/6th, then he had children. So, which leads to Anne, who we're talking about today, Queen Anne the First. And some of the health concerns that Mary Queen of Scots had seem kind of similar to some of the ones that Queen Anne has, which seem kind of similar to some of the ones that Caroline of Brunswick has. And that's just kind of like what happens when you keep marrying your own cousins. Just saying. Like, we're not at like a Habsburg level, but diversifying the gene pool is only ever a good thing. So I just wanted to set up some of the context for who we're talking about today in the sense of like episodes we've later done and how they connect back to her. But I also find it interesting / tragic that when you listen to this episode, which I recorded in mid 2020, like early days of the pandemic, before there even was a vaccine for people to get mad about and or take, was I was talking about like, it's weird, it's unprecedented times. This podcast is here to reassure you and to give you something to look forward to. And I'm recording this in March of 2025. And there's other crises going on. COVID, still a thing. And I'm also here still saying this podcast sees your struggles. And I recognize that there's a lot of fucked up things happening in the world, and especially in the United States lately. And I don't want to not mention it on the podcast, but also I want this podcast to be like an escape for you, like a respite. Like, let's hear about oldie-timey people and smallpox. You know what? Because that distracts us from current times. And there's always going to be an episode of Vulgar History 1 week later coming up. And that's a thing that you all have to look forward to. And anyway, so I also, that context I think is important when you listen to this episode. I do talk about some 2020 related things, but the main gist of it is the story of Queen Anne, the niece of Hot Charles II. Did she know Fubs? Maybe. She got up to some real juicy gossip. The stuff she does in Bath makes me think, like, the story does remind me in some ways of Caroline of Brunswick, who's not her descendant because she didn't have any descendants. That's the issue and why the crown moved over. But her relative. This kind of feels a bit like, what if Caroline of Brunswick had been the queen and a lesbian? What would that have been like? Anyway, here's an episode. Women's History Month coming to a close, but it stays in our hearts forever, and it stays the theme of this podcast forever. So let's throw it back to 2020 Anne, talking about someone else called Anne, and enjoy. Hello and welcome to Vulgar History. My name is Anne Foster, and this is a feminist women's history comedy podcast. This is season 2, and what we've been looking at all season long are women leaders in history and the men who whined about them. And this was going to be the season 2 finale. We've been sort of going in chronological order, and this is as close to modern day as we were going to get. But then I found another story that I really wanted to do, so there's going to be one more episode next week. So this is the penultimate episode of season 2, which is not to say the penultimate episode of this podcast forever. It's just of season 2. And if you go through the feed, if you're listening to this in real time, I'm recording this during the pandemic era, and I've been releasing some mini-sodes for everybody, just about some interesting stories about past pandemics and world histories and some of the bonkers things that happened that people did during them. So anyway, so what I was doing was I was researching different pandemic stuff, and then I found this story that was really cool. And when I started to sort of write the context for it, I realized like, oh, this is a full episode. This isn't just a pandemic mini-sode. All of which to say, this is a regular episode this week. There'll be another regular episode next week, and in between, all kinds of pandemic specials, because I keep reading about it for some reason, how other people dealt with pandemic type situations. Anyway, I'm pretty sure today's episode doesn't have any plague in it, although I think there's smallpox. Smallpox is involved. People die of various things because human bodies do that. But anyway, so we've been looking at women leaders in history, most of them, many of them from England and or the United Kingdom as well. We also had a sojourn into ancient Egypt and ancient Rome. But the woman who I'm going to look at this week is one of, I think, am I right? One of only 4 officially recognized queen regnants of England / the United Kingdom. Pretty sure there's only 4. And it is Queen Anne of Great Britain. And she suddenly became very well known after she was the subject of the film The Favourite in 2018, that won the Oscars in 2019. And her story is really, really interesting. And I'm glad that The Favourite came out and that a lot of people saw it, and it got a lot of people Googling who is Queen Anne, because that did really good things for the search engine optimization on my blog. Anyway, but mostly, more than anything, I'm just glad that it's got people looking at her and reassessing her and figuring out who she is. So when I went to see The Favorite for the first time, because I've seen it more than once, obviously, because it's an amazing movie, afterwards, there were some people in the audience, and I think it was two young men. It was at least a young man and companion. And one of them was just like, he had clearly just Googled who is Queen Anne, and he was reading some stuff about like, oh yeah, and like, he was reading stuff about Anne Boleyn, basically, and I was just like, should I correct him? This is awkward. And then I couldn't stop myself. I had to say like, oh, no, this it's not the same as Anne Boleyn. This is a whole different time period. So bold of Yorgos Lanthimos, the filmmaker, to make a film about a woman that not a lot of people knew who she was to begin with, and clearly a lot of people went to see the movie and still didn't know who she was, because I still get a lot of hits on my website for who is she. So we're going to talk about it because it is an incredibly interesting story with lots of twists, turns, and the whole thing about like women and leadership. A lot of the themes we've looked at other people this season all come into play again. So let's do it. Anne with an E. I have to say, my name is Anne Foster without an E. Her name is Anne with an E. It's a little strange for me to be talking about Anne in the third person, but here we go. Anne, not me, was born on February 6th, 1665, and she was the fourth child born to then the king. So the king at the time was King Charles II. She was born to King Charles II's younger brother, Prince James, and his wife, Anne Hyde. So King Charles II was very well known for having lots of mistresses and lots of children with his mistresses, but no legitimate children. This meant that Princess Anne, our main character, her father, the younger brother of the king, was heir to the throne, because the whole thing was it goes from father to son, from man to man. And in this case, there wasn't even any women options. Like, it was just going to go to him. So her father was heir to the throne, meaning that her older brother, who is named James, her father was also named James. This is going to get confusing, like these stories always do. So I'll try and explain who they are in context. So heir to the throne was Anne's father, James. And then next in line to the throne was Anne's older brother, also called James. And then next in line to the throne was Anne's older sister, called Mary, and then her. So this is already looking like a pretty unlikely scenario that she's going to end up becoming the monarch at all, right? Lots of people ahead of her who could have their own children, etc. Oh ho, we all know what's going to happen. Well, you know where it's going to wind up, but you don't know what's going to happen, because how could you? It is a wild story. So Prince James, her father, was widely rumored to be a secret Catholic. And this was an era, 1665, when the country's religion was Protestant. So Charles II, the king, instructed that Anne and all of her siblings should be raised as Protestants, just in case they wound up taking over the country in the future, so that there would continue to be Protestant monarchs. So the first 6 years of Anne's life were marked by a lot of death. And I mean, just from what I've been reading about recently, she was born February 1665. That was just around the time that the Great Plague hit London/England. So there was a lot of death of people she didn't know, as well as people she did know. So her brother, James, her older brother, died when Anne was 2 years old. And at around the same time, her parents had another son, a new baby brother called Charles, who died in infancy at around the same time. She also had a baby sister named Henrietta 1 year later, who was born and then died in infancy. And by this point, and again, this is just the first 6 years of her life, Anne herself was already dealing with a medical condition of some sort. And it's the sort of thing, even nowadays, people might not know what it is. You know, when the symptoms are just like, we're not sure, that's kind of not the symptom of anything, so maybe it's all in your head because you're a girl, sort of thing. So she had a lot of medical issues throughout her life. The issue that she had here was that her eyes watered excessively, okay? So she was shipped off age 4 to stay in France with her grandmother because they thought that maybe the fresh French air, I don't know, maybe she would recuperate over there. But shortly after she arrived, her grandmother died. So then Anne was transferred to stay with an aunt who is also in France. And then that aunt died. And so 6-year-old Anne was shipped back to England. Very soon after she returned, 2 more younger siblings died in infancy, and at around the same time, her mother died. So if you're keeping track, we now just have 2 royal siblings left. Mary, the older sister, and Anne, the younger sister. Unless their father remarried and had another son, these 2 girls were second and third in line to the throne. But remember how her father was rumored to be a secret Catholic? He came out of the Catholic closet when Anne was 8 years old, publicly converting to being a full Roman Catholic, which was like the biggest scandal ever because the country was Protestant. There had been numerous wars about this. And then her father chose a new wife, because remember his wife had died, who was a Catholic princess named Mary of Modena. Mary of Modena was 14 years old, making her just 6 years older than her new stepdaughter, Anne. And everyone started to freak out about the sons that James and Mary and Modena would likely start having because the sons would be Catholic, and because of primogeniture, they would be ahead of Anne and Mary, and everyone's just panicking because it seems like, what if the next king is going to be Catholic? So, in 1677, Anne's older sister Mary was married to their Protestant cousin, William III of Orange, which is in the Netherlands. So Mary, the older sister, sailed away to live with him in the Netherlands to be queen over there. Anne was infected with smallpox at around the same time as her sister's wedding, so she couldn't attend, and she wasn't able to say goodbye, which is just pretty sad. Also, having smallpox is a horrible thing. I was reading about that for some of these pandemic podcast episodes, and just like, it's great that she didn't die of it. So, speaking of sad, her governess also caught smallpox and died. So Anne's bad luck of being constantly surrounded by death and her being the only one who doesn't die continued on. When she was 12 years old, her uncle, King Charles II, chose a husband for her. So she got married to her cousin, Prince George of Denmark, on July 28, 1683, which meant Anne got to move out of the family palace and start her own royal court. Age 12. She also got her own ladies in waiting, and one of them was a childhood friend of hers, a young girl who she'd grown up with, whose name was Sarah Churchill. Remember that name, because that's going to come up lots more later. Despite her young age, Anne's marriage to George was consummated pretty quickly, as she became pregnant really soon. Her first pregnancy ended in a stillbirth, but she became pregnant twice more in the next 2 years, and she had 2 daughters whose names were Mary, because the story doesn't have enough people named Mary in it yet, apparently, and Anne Sophia, which is a nice name. And soon after that, her uncle King Charles II died, meaning that her father became King James II, a Catholic king, and this meant a whole bunch of new problems for basically everybody. So from basically day one, nobody was a fan of King James II, especially the way that he fired all the Protestant officials and hired new Catholic people in their place. Anne, who remember had been raised Protestant, because remember her uncle, the king, had made sure that she was raised Protestant, continued to practice her own faith, as did her sister, off in the Netherlands with her husband, William. James II was like, so it would be really cool, Anne, if you had your daughters baptized as Catholics. Apparently this made Anne burst into tears because she hated Catholics. She didn't want her daughters to be Catholic. Like, she was so upset that from this point on, after he suggested that, she became estranged from her father and her stepmother, Mary of Modena, who was again 6 years older than her. But Anne didn't have a lot of time to focus on family estrangement because her life continued to be unrelentingly tinged with death and tragedy. Over a period of 1 week in 1687, she had another miscarriage. Both of her young daughters died of smallpox, and her husband George also fell ill, presumably smallpox also. This is a story where anytime someone gets sick from this point on, which I'm just assuming smallpox. So she and George were left grieving the death of their children and the miscarriage as he struggled to survive. But George made a full recovery, and Anne became pregnant again later that year, which ended in another stillbirth. But someone else was also not having much luck vis-a-vis pregnancies, her 6 years older stepmother, Mary of Modena. So Mary of Modena, the stepmother, had become pregnant 10 times since she married Anne's father. Each of these 10 pregnancies had ended in either miscarriage, stillbirth, or the infant death of the child. And this is so sad for Mary of Modena as a woman, as a person, just to go through this, and was also freaking James out because he needed to have a new Catholic heir, otherwise his Protestant daughters would become his heirs. And this was an issue of like, oh no, women heirs, but also like religion thing. So as long as he and Mary of Modena didn't have a surviving child, then Mary and then Anne would be the next monarchs. But then Mary of Modena suddenly became pregnant, and everybody waited to see how it was going to turn out. If it was a son and he survived, he would be the new Catholic heir to the throne, which would change everything. How lucky and convenient that would be. But Anne thought, this is all just like a little bit too convenient, maybe. So Anne had a theory that her stepmother wasn't really pregnant, but was actually faking being pregnant. And the plan that Anne thought her stepmother had was that on the delivery day, she'd pull a switcheroo with some random baby and claim that was the new Catholic heir to the throne. Why would they maybe do this? Well, basically because Mary of Modena and James were really desperate to have a surviving son and heir to continue on their Catholic ways, and they really didn't want Anne or Mary to become the new queen and switch everybody back to being Protestant. And Anne didn't keep her theory a secret. She made sure that everybody heard this rumor because, as we will see in later examples, she lived for the drama of it all. So a bit before her stepmother's delivery date, Anne had another miscarriage, or she said she did, or she did and used it to her advantage. Anyway, she went off to recuperate in the spa town of Bath. So normally, when the new queen gives birth to a new heir, the other heirs come into the room to witness the birth to make, in case somebody dies, and the other heirs have to like quickly take over because childbirth was so dangerous at this period. But Anne was like, sorry, I can't be there to watch this probably fake birth. I'm too busy here at the spa because I just had a miscarriage. Bye. So it was kind of convenient. And so this is where the rumors come from, that she had maybe was lying about the miscarriage in order to just have an excuse to not be present for the birth. So while Anne was in Bath, her stepmother allegedly gave birth to a son, or else pulled a switcheroo, or one way or another, there was a new heir to the throne who was a baby named James, who was baptized Catholic. Every male person in the story seems to be called James, but this one is little baby James. So Anne wrote a letter to her sister Mary in the Netherlands, and she was in the letter, she was like, so allegedly this baby James is our half-brother, but I don't know if he really is. There might have been a switcheroo involved. I wasn't there at the birth because I was tragically at the spa that day, so please feel free to spread this rumor around the Netherlands. And her sister wrote back, like, solid theory. Also, P.S. William and I are probably going to invade and take over from our Catholic father. Don't tell anyone. And Anne was like, amazing. I'll keep her father distracted with all this fake baby stuff so he'll be too busy to notice you and William invading. And that is exactly what happened. So their father, King James II, was really busy defending himself, being like, my wife just 100% gave birth to a baby. I can prove it. Look, here, there's 40 other people were in the room when she gave birth, and I'll get them all to testify, and they'll all say that they saw the baby come out of her vagina. Like, Anne, can you please come and hear their testimony so you'll stop spreading these rumors? And Anne was like, I'm sorry, I can't travel. I'm pregnant, which for most of her life would have been true, but at this point was not. She was totally lying. So her father had a written record of all the 40 witnesses' testimony, and he was like, Anne, I can send you the minutes of this testimony so you can read it to stop spreading these rumors. And she was like, no thanks. And James freaked out, and Anne just kind of kept him distracted with that. And then revolution. So as her sister had hinted, she and William of Orange invaded England on November 5th, 1688, in order to take over as Protestant co-monarchs. And it worked. They were successful, and the whole thing became known as the Glorious Revolution. So now, back in England, Anne had been pretending like she didn't know this was going to happen. And in fact, the only person that she told was her best friend forever, her BFF, Sarah Churchill, Duchess of Marlborough. Remember her from earlier? Her lady-in-waiting? So, Sarah Churchill was connected to the very powerful Churchill family, who are, side note, the ancestors of Winston Churchill. And so the powerful Churchill family supported William and Mary's coup, but then James found out that the Churchills were against him, and he ordered that Sarah should be arrested. And Anne freaked out. She was like, I will never betray my best friend. And she secretly snuck out the backstairs of the palace with Sarah to escape being arrested. When James found out that his daughter had deserted him, he was like, wow, like not even my estranged daughter supports me. I guess I'll just go flee to France with my wife and baby James. And that is what they did. So after all this happened, the courtiers, like all the people in the palace, were like, whoa, that was like super intense. Like, Anne, are you okay? And she was like, it's fine. What day is it? Tuesday? Oh, Tuesday. That's the day I play cards. Let's play cards. And everybody was like, whoa, look how chill she is amid all this drama. And she literally played cards. But like, look at her life to this point. She was like a first responder type person. Like, she's somebody who's like so constantly living through extremely stressful, dramatic things. Her tolerance for highly stressful situations was clearly much higher than that of the average person. And so she played cards, and William and Mary were Protestant co-monarchs of England, and everything was glorious for like 5 minutes. So since William and Mary didn't have any of their own children, a whole decision had to be made about who would be their heir. As co-monarchs, whichever one of them died first would be succeeded by the other one. So sort of like, if you listen to the podcast from 2 weeks ago, the whole Isabella Ferdinand scenario. So it's like William's heir is Mary and Mary's heir is William, but once they're both dead, who would it go to? And so the next heir would be Anne or her children, if she had any children. At this point, she did not. But then the year after the Glorious Revolution, Anne had another child. She had a son who named William. He not only survived childbirth and infancy, but like kept growing up. So he was now the heir to William and Mary, baby William. So William and Mary were so grateful to Sarah and the Churchill family for having supported them during the whole revolution that they gave her husband the title Earl of Marlborough. And this is how Sarah herself becomes the Duchess of Marlborough. And then again, everything's great for 5 minutes and then becomes chaos again, because that is like what this whole woman's life is like. So everything's amazing. So Anne was like, my sister is the queen. She's a Protestant like me. William and Mary, I would like to have a palace I can live in and also lots of allowance money. Thank you. And William and Mary were like, we'll give you a palace, but we're not going to give you any allowance money. And Anne was like, okay, but can you give my husband, George, an important military role? And Mary and William were like, no. And then Anne was like, okay, well, now we're estranged forever. The only friend I need in my life is Sarah Churchill. Goodbye forever. So she just like, when someone burned a bridge with Anne, she was just like done with them. It's clearly a character trait. So the only friend she had, or that she felt she needed, was Sarah Churchill. So they were really, really, really close in a way that princesses and duchesses weren't usually, and in a way that they kind of weren't supposed to be based on like cultural expectations, etc. In the film The Favorite, they showed them as being in a sexual relationship. Maybe they were. Who knows? But they were definitely really, really close. Anne saw the two of them as equals, and as such, they called each other by the nicknames Mrs. Morley and Mrs. Freeman to indicate how they were on the same level, like class base system-wise. But then, William and Mary began to suspect that Sarah's husband was secretly meeting with supporters of the deposed King James in France, and this was treason, so they fired the Earl of Marlborough from his various important jobs and demanded that Anne remove Sarah as one of her ladies-in-waiting. But, like, clearly at this point, like, Anne was never gonna betray her best friend. So it all got super intense to the point that Mary personally fired Sarah herself, which was, like, really not really done because Sarah was technically a lady-in-waiting for Anne. And then Anne just, like, went full-on nuclear option. So Anne stormed into the castle and ran off to live in a different castle because she couldn't even stand to look at her sister anymore after this betrayal. And Mary, then she fired Anne's guard of honor and officially forbid anyone from talking to her. Like, none of the servants could talk to her. Like, no one would talk to her. So Anne was in this other palace surrounded by people who weren't even allowed to acknowledge that she was there. So this, like, sisterly drama playing out in this, like, 17th century royal setting. It's just wild. I want to have, like, a prequel, like, miniseries to The Favorite about young Anne and Mary, because this is just, like, my God. Okay.
And now for a quick advertising break.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Shifting a little money here, a little there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. When I was younger, I would help my little sister do her makeup for dance competitions. And while I enjoyed spending that time with her, learning about the different techniques needed to achieve the look, there were pretty strict guidelines for the stage makeup, and not much room for self-expression. I was reminded of those moments recently when I was helping one of my best friends get ready for a party. As a trans woman who came out later in life, she didn't grow up playing with makeup like I had, and we had so much fun picking just the right purples and eye glitter to match her outfit for the evening. What made us both feel beautiful that night wasn't just about the makeup, but how we were committing to showing up as ourselves and encouraging each other to do the same. That's the commitment that Thrive Cosmetics also knows well, with over 10 years of celebrating the strength and beauty of women. And they don't just talk the talk. For every product purchased, Thrive Cosmetics donates products and funds to support important causes, including domestic abuse survivors, veterans, homelessness, and LGBTQ+ communities. I feel proud getting my favorite makeup products from them, knowing that it also positively impacts people and communities I care about. And they really do carry my favorite makeup products. One that I can't get enough of is the Liquid Lash Extensions Mascara. It's the best mascara I've ever used. It doesn't clump or smudge, and my eyelashes always look dramatically longer thanks to their flake-free tubing formula. Plus, like all of Thrive Cosmetics beauty products, it's certified 100% vegan, cruelty-free, and made with clean, skin-loving ingredients. So whether it's for yourself, a sister, a friend, celebrate the women in your life with Thrive Cosmetics, luxury beauty that gives back. Right now, you can get an exclusive 20% off your first order at thrivecosmetics.com/thrive. That's Thrive Cosmetics, CAUSEMETICS.com/thrive for 20% off your first order. There are many ways to entice a potential new customer with flashy branding and calculated marketing strategies. But at the end of the day, the success of a business comes down to the ability to close the sale. And for businesses like Thrive Cosmetics, Allbirds, or Skims, it's what goes on behind the scenes, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple that makes the difference. For them and for millions of businesses, that difference is made with Shopify. Businesses that want to grow, grow with Shopify. Because if your goal is growth, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And Shopify will make sure you're ready. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. And with Shop Pay, they boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. It's no wonder Shopify is home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/realm.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
And we're back. So as ever, Anne was pregnant through all of this. Just assume until her husband dies, she is constantly pregnant because she was. So in the midst of all this drama with her and her sister, she gave birth to another son who only lived for a few minutes. Sadly, William was still there though. She still had one son. So after this latest child death, Mary headed off to the other castle. And so you think was she going to go and make amends with her sister? Was she going to help grieve with her over this child death? Of course not. What happened is Mary stomped into Anne's room, being oh, stop being friends with Sarah. I hate you. And then Anne was oh, I hate you too. And then she moved to another different castle even further away. And she never saw her sister again because Mary died 2 years later of smallpox. And these were two women who could hold a grudge. So Mary is now dead, which means William becomes the solo king on his own because he was the co-monarch and kind of her heir. So his heirs at this point were Anne's son, baby William, and Anne was kind of the next heir, I guess, until William had his own other baby William had his own son. So the King William, decided to try and smooth over the relationship between him and Anne because basically that's all he had vis-a-vis heirs. So he gave back all the possessions and titles that Mary had previously removed from her. He allowed people to talk to her again and invited her to come back and live in the main palace. He even gave Anne all of Mary's jewels and then restored Sarah and her husband to their former positions. So everything was doing great on one way, but health-wise, Anne was doing not so well. So her 17th pregnancy ended in a miscarriage at around this time, and all for other various health problems became even worse. So doctors back then had different methodologies and diagnoses than we do now, but based on her symptoms, it seems like Anne likely had a pretty bad combination of arthritis, gout, and other things, including the after effects of being pregnant 17 times. Increasingly frequently, she had trouble walking, so she sometimes used a chair with wheels on it because wheelchairs hadn't been invented yet. She sometimes had people carry her around in chairs without wheels on them. So she's living with chronic pain, presumably psychological issues based on literally her whole life so far. And then her son William died, aged 11. I'm not sure of what. I'm going to guess smallpox, but some sort of health-based issue. His date of death was July 30th, and Anne decreed that every year on July 30th, everybody in the household that lived with her were to mark that day as a day of mourning. And what this meant with his death was that Anne is literally the only remaining heir to King William. So Parliament was pretty frantic at this point about the issue of who would be heir after all these childless people, not only because they're a woman inheriting, we don't love that idea, but also what if the next person in line was Catholic or something? If Anne inherited, it's not their top choice, but also she didn't have any surviving children, so who would inherit after her? So it's a two-stage inheritance crisis. So they unfurled the family tree, crossed off everybody who was Catholic, and looked to see who was left. 50 names were removed from the line of succession, which meant that a very distant relation, who was a Protestant woman named Sophia, Elector of Hanover, went from 51st in line to first in line. Who is Sophia, Elector of Hanover? I'm glad you asked. She was the granddaughter of James I, who was Mary, Queen of Scots' son. So James I had a daughter who was Elizabeth of Bohemia, and then Sophia was a descendant of her. So she was the great-granddaughter of Mary, Queen of Scots, and the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Henry VIII's older sister, Margaret Tudor. But what mattered most to everybody, and she's a woman, and they're as long as she's Protestant, even being a woman is okay. And so an act was written up saying that she was the next heir after Anne, and then her Protestant descendants after her. But first things first. So William died in 1702, which meant that Queen Anne became Queen Anne. She was at this point 37 years old and doing poorly health-wise, to the extent that she had to be carried down the aisle of Westminster Abbey in a chair, as she couldn't walk for her coronation. But to make it all dramatic, someone, probably Sarah Churchill, arranged for a low back to be put on the chair so Anne's long train could unfurl dramatically behind her down the aisle, which sounds amazing. Among her first acts as queen was to give a bunch of important titles to her husband, George, as well as to Sarah and to Sarah's husband. And this is basically where the movie The Favourite begins. So Anne, now the queen, was beyond devoted to her best friend Sarah Churchill, to the point that everyone around them was this is weird. Why is Sarah Churchill so important to this woman? Anne did things she gave Sarah her own palace and did basically everything nice for her, and Sarah was sort of mean to her sometimes, and it was seemingly a sort of toxic scenario where Anne sort of indulged her and then Sarah was sort of mean back to her. And again, you can see this all in The Favourite, the film. And then into this codependent scenario arrived a new courtier named Abigail Hill. And this is the role played by Emma Stone in the movie. And Anne liked her a lot, and they became secret friends because she knew that Sarah didn't want her to be friends with anybody else. Sarah didn't even know that they were friends until Abigail got married to a man named Baron Masham, making her now Abigail Baroness Masham, and Anne was a guest at the wedding. So Sarah found out that Anne and Abigail were close enough that Anne got a wedding invitation, and Sarah Churchill freaked out in rage, jealousy, So there were special rooms at Kensington Palace reserved for Sarah when she came to stay there to visit her friend, the Queen. But since Sarah spent most of her time off in her own personal castle, Anne let Abigail move into Sarah's rooms, and then Sarah freaked out when she found out about that. And then everything just gets wild. So Sarah showed up at court with a very raunchy poem all about how the Queen was in a sexual relationship with Abigail. Sarah didn't write the poem. She had commissioned it from a poet. And so she had this poem that she had written, and then she went to the Queen oh my God, look, someone wrote this poem about you and Abigail. Spending time with her is ruining your reputation, so you should stop being friends with her. You should be friends with me instead. And Anne was like, can't I have two friends? But secretly, Anne seemed to enjoy having Sarah and Abigail fighting over her. Again, the movie The Favourite goes through this stuff. And a lot of this drama was a very sort of etiquette battle sort of thing. One of Sarah's jobs was picking out which jewels the Queen would wear each day. And one day the Queen chose to wear different jewels from the ones Sarah had chosen. And then Sarah freaked out because not wearing the jewels she'd chosen was the etiquette version of being punched in the face. So Sarah, who clearly had quite a temper that she was not afraid of demonstrating, literally yelled at the Queen in public to shut up, which is you're not allowed to do that. That's kind of treason. But nobody stopped her, and Anne didn't punish her. So it's all just sort of that's the culture that's going on. And so to add to all of this, just wild sequence of events, Anne's husband suddenly died. Again, I'm guessing smallpox. Anne was super upset about this. Obviously, they've been husband for decades. They've been through a lot together as a couple, such as 17 pregnancies and all the child death. She'd always had a portrait of her husband George hanging in her room, and one day she went into her room and it was gone. And Sarah was like, yeah, that was me. I took down the portrait because I thought it would make you sad and you shouldn't look at it. And then Anne was like, put it back. And Sarah was like, make me. And Anne was like, I'm the Queen. And Sarah was like, me. And then they just sort of had this huge fight. And that's the sort of stuff that was going on. Eventually, Anne wrote a letter to Sarah's husband can you please tell your wife to stop being mean to me and stop yelling at me and stop stealing paintings of my dead husband? And Sarah's husband was like, what's going on, Sarah? And so Sarah went to have a face-to-face with Anne, which happened on April 6th, 1710, and they had a friend breakup. These two were now officially estranged, and say what you will about Queen Anne I, but when she decided to end a relationship with somebody, she just she did. She would no looking back. So meanwhile, back in France, Anne's father, the former king, James, was hanging out with his wife, Mary of Modena, their son, baby James, and they had another child who they named Louisa Maria Theresa. So by now, baby James, who is now an adult, had been brought up being told that he was actually the rightful king of England, and he believed it. And he kind of was the rightful king of England because William and Mary sort of took over. Anyway, so James, the younger, formerly baby James, and his supporters were called the Jacobites, and they decided to sail over to Scotland and begin the work of taking the country back and making it Catholic. They had some secret allies who he thought would help, but Anne had spies of her own who intercepted James and chased him away. But then, Sarah Churchill, a woman who could seriously carry a grudge, was spreading the story that Anne secretly wanted her half-brother James to become the heir instead of Sophia, Elector of Hanover. And just like how it was impossible for her father to prove that his child wasn't secretly switcherooed, Anne found it impossible to convince anyone that this gossip wasn't true. Because when people don't like you, they can't really be convinced that mean rumors about you aren't true. Throughout all of this, this is all just personal life stuff, and that's what I tend to be most interested in and what I tend to talk about on the podcast. But bear in mind, Anne was also being the queen. So she sat in more cabinet meetings than any previous English monarch had ever done, and also more than most of the later monarchs did. She was interested in what was going on in Parliament and did lots of important political stuff that other people have written about. I'm just here to tell you the juicy gossip bits, but I'll put some recommended reading in the show notes for this if you want to read about her political side of her life. Even though Anne's health concerns were becoming more and more exacerbated, she became basically a bedridden invalid. She could walk, but she sometimes needed a wheelchair instead. Now she couldn't even walk anymore. She would wheel herself in her chair with wheels, or have people carry her into Parliament, where she attended all-nighter meetings to go over important government business. And then on July 30th, 1714, which is the 14th anniversary of the death of her son William, the date that she always had everyone commemorate as a day of mourning. Anne had a stroke that left her unable to speak, and then she passed away on April 1st, 1714, aged 49. Queen Anne was buried in Westminster Abbey, the same place where 12 years before she'd been carried down the aisle in a chair with a low back so that she could have a train. She was laid to rest next to her husband George, as well as the remains of many of her stillborn and infant children, as well as her son William, who died aged 11. And Sophia, Elector of Hanover, who had been her heir, actually died just a few months before, which meant that Anne's heir was Sophia's son, who became King George I. And we'll talk about that another time. Oh, he was the one who was the king during Mary Toft, giving birth to rabbits scenario, if you want to just like match these Jenga pieces up in your mind. But the story doesn't end here, because Sarah Churchill was not willing to let go of her grudge, even though Anne was dead. So Sarah lived for 30 more years after Anne had died, and later published a memoir that basically trashed Anne as being the simpleton/idiot and spilled lots of like quote-unquote secrets that may or may not have been true. But because everyone knew how close Sarah had been to the Queen, her word was taken as truth, and this affected Queen Anne's reputation for centuries to come. Because conveniently, Sarah's description of Anne as this kind of useless and overly emotional woman fell neatly into that patriarchal stereotype of women being unsuited for leadership roles, which may also be why the story was accepted so readily. But the third point of the favorites' sort of love triangle, Abigail Masham left royal court after Anne's death and lived out the rest of her life in private. So Sarah Churchill is the only one who's just like clinging onto this whole thing. And although Anne's reign was relatively short, it was 12 years, which is shorter than some, longer than others. She was the sitting monarch during a number of hugely important political events, such as England and Scotland uniting into Europe's then largest free trade area. She oversaw numerous successful battles, like she wasn't on the battlefield, but a king wouldn't have been either. Actually, Sarah Churchill's husband, Lord Marlborough, led a lot of these battles, but she was the queen while these battles happened, especially a lot of sea battles. She was a noted patron of the arts and literature and was the namesake for the well-known Queen Anne style of architecture and furniture. The timing of her reign coincided with a time of a whole lot of colonization by English people in eastern North America. So a bunch of places were named after her, including the American city of Annapolis, the Nova Scotian Annapolis Royal and Annapolis Valley and Fort Anne, as well as Princess Anne Street in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and Queen Square in Bloomsbury, London. So it's time to go through a scandalicious scale for Queen Anne. And this is an interesting one, like in terms of like women leaders and the men who whined about them. Like her reputation suffered a lot. And a lot of that was because of how Sarah Churchill whined about it, frankly. And it's interesting, too, because of the whole Catholic versus Protestant thing, that she was a woman, which was not a lot of people's first choice, but she was Protestant, and that was preferred to a Catholic. Same with Sophia of Hanover. But we're going to go into the scandalicious scale here, and the first category is scandaliciousness. And I think Queen Anne gets a 10. For scandaliciousness, just because she was super into gossip. The whole thing where she like went to the spa on purpose, potentially pretending to have had a miscarriage just so she could like continue to spread rumors about her half-brother maybe having been switched at birth. The Sarah Churchill screaming at her in front of other people, Sarah Churchill showing up with the like lesbian poems, like just the court at this time seemed to have been quite scandalous, and that was a lot of her. You know what, I'm going to give her like maybe not 10, maybe like an 8 for scandaliciousness, because there's like a lot of juicy gossip type stuff going on. But in terms of like comparing her to other people that we've done on this show, there's no murder moment. There's not that one major scandal that really tips everything over, but just her life, she lived her life in a scandalicious sort of way that I respect. Scheminess. I'm going to give her a 9 for scheminess, I think, because while we don't know a lot of the schemes that she got up to, like the ones that we do know about, like, again, like spreading rumors about her half-brother being maybe switched at birth, The whole thing with like the fact that she knew that her sister was going to invade and she didn't tell anybody, the way that she snuck away in the middle of the night to keep Sarah Churchill from being fired. Like, her scheminess is good. And then also, because we looked at other people this way in terms of like how they ruled, how they led, like she oversaw a lot of successful military campaigns, which is sort of scheminess. Her significance is a tricky one because, well, she for a long time was seen as quite insignificant. She was queen for 12 years, and during those 12 years, a lot of stuff happened that was helpful to England, such as the beginnings of Great Britain happening. A lot of military victories, a lot of places were named after her. So it's sort of like she was significant in a way. Like Annapolis is like a thing a lot of people have heard about, even if people don't know who she was, to the point when the movie The Favorite came out, everybody started Googling who is she and read my essay. I'm going to say 6.5. 6.5 for significance. And the final category is the sexism bonus. And this is interesting to consider because on the one hand, if she had been in a situation where women were more respected, like she would have just been the heir and her father maybe wouldn't have gotten married. There wouldn't have been the whole Jacobite rebellion and stuff. But it's interesting in a way, like that her gender didn't super get in her way. Like she became the heir because there was no one else to be the heir after William and Mary. And then she had, 17 pregnancies, like a lot of health problems, and that was all related to her biology and stuff. If she hadn't been pregnant all those many times, maybe she wouldn't have had the health problems. I don't know. I can't give her less than a 5 for sexism, but honestly and intriguingly, I don't think that was really one of the big challenges that got in her way. So let me just add this up. We have 28.5. So where does that land her? Next week, when I do the finale for the season, I'm going to post kind of all the scores so everybody else can see them, because I always find it interesting to see. I always say, and I mean it very genuinely, like I'm not pitting these women against each other to say like who's cooler than the other or who's better than the other, but just I'm scoring on 4 different things and where does everybody fall when you score them in this way. But 28.5 puts her in 5th place overall, like in terms of scores. She is shockingly 0.5 above Cleopatra, and so she's just below Elizabeth Bathory, who has a 29. I feel like they sort of have some similarities there. I'll post this whole list next week, I think, because it is interesting to see where everybody goes. But frankly, and maybe it's because this season we've been doing women leaders, which inherently means they're, I guess, more significant. But the top 3 right now, so Agrippina the younger has 31, Empress Matilda has 30, Juana the First of Castile has 30, and then those are all from this season. Elizabeth Bathory from season 1 is at 29, and then Queen Anne is 5th place at 28.5 with Cleopatra, and Lucy Hay tied just below her at 28. Anyway, that is Queen Anne of Great Britain. There are a bunch of books. Okay, sorry, there's not a bunch of books. There's literally like 2 books. There's a book called Queen Anne, The Politics of Passion by Anne Somerset, which gets into, I think it's a great title, The Politics of Passion, because her emotional, like her relationships with people were such a significant part of her. She also had a lot of, as they describe it here in the description of the book, personal misfortune, just the death that constantly surrounded her, just a lot of the health problems she had. So yeah, if she had been, I don't know, so I'm reconsidering, like if she had been a man king with similar problems, like I don't think anyone would be like, oh my god, this poor man, he had 17 pregnancies. Well, I mean, chances are he wouldn't, but like people don't look at her husband and saying like, oh, this poor man, he fathered 17 failed pregnancies. So I don't know, she's really judged harshly. It's not like it's like she's judged harshly in her time. She's judged harshly in retrospect by people who say like, ooh, you know, she was a woman, she was emotional, she had these like relationships with people, she had all these pregnancy health problems, in a way that men wouldn't be judged, but to the point that it sort of supersedes what she actually did as a monarch, which was lots of impressive stuff, seeing England through a pretty rocky time. So there's that book, Queen Anne, The Politics of Passion by Anne Somerset. And there's also a book called The Favorite, The Life of Sarah Churchill and the History Behind the Major Motion Picture. So this is about Sarah Churchill / Anne is another book. And I'll put all the links to that in the show notes. I don't know. Is this, I don't know. I've never done this before, but I think I'm going to bump up her sexism bonus a little bit because in her time, she didn't face a lot of it, but like afterwards she did. I gave her a 7 for sexism, and I feel like I'm going to give her an 8 for sexism, which, yes, is going to increase her score. Now she's at 29.5 because I don't know. Everybody did. It's not a contest. But the people who are up here she faced I don't know. I feel good about that. Just talking it through. So now she's 4th place. Agrippina the Younger, 31. Empress Matilda at 30. Juana the First of Castile at 30. Queen Anne the First, 29.5. Elizabeth Bathory, 29. These are all women on this list who they all faced sexism. Anyway, that's kind of the theme of what we're looking at. Anyway, this is the Vulgar History Podcast. My name is Anne Foster. I'm just going to run through the things that I always say at the end, just like little reminders for you. For instance, if you want to find some books to read, I think they're all historical nonfiction books. The ones that I recommend, the ones that I've been using for researching this podcast and other projects I'm working on, are all listed on my bookshop.org page. So if you go to bookshop.org/lists/vulgar history recommends with dashes between vulgar history recommends, you can find a list of these books about Queen Anne as well as other books about other women we've been talking about and other books about just nonfiction books that I recommend. Bookshop.org is a fantastic site. The money from there goes towards independent bookstores who need so much support right now in this pandemic era. So I'm supporting them in this little way that I can. The link to that will be in the show notes as well. We've got my little merch store. So if you go to teespring.com/stores/vulgar history, you can find t-shirts, tote bags, mugs, all different sorts of items that are all commemorating the women who we've been looking at during this season. I've got one, like an item for each of the different women. So if there's somebody who's your fave, there's somebody who you want to represent. I just put out the Juana of Castile stuff, which is just a portrait of her, and it says like La Reina, like the queen. It's pretty great. The thing about the merch store is that I basically want to buy everything from it from myself, but maybe you'll like some of the stuff as well. And again, that's at Teespring, and there'll be an item there when this episode drops for Queen Anne as well, because she's someone who is very much worth celebrating, I think. If you want to support me / this podcast, my Patreon is patreon.com/AnneFosterWriter. The original essay that I wrote about Queen Anne, which again, because of this film and people seeing it and no one knowing who she was, it did amazing things for my website, this film. Just people Googling, who is this person? And then reading my essay about it. So you can find that essay at AnneFosterWriter.com. The podcast is also on Instagram and Twitter. And if you have thoughts or comments or whatever, you can email that at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com. And yes, there's going to be one more episode in this season of Women Leaders in History and the Men Who Whined About Them. That'll be coming out next Wednesday. In the meantime, there's going to be some more catch up on the bonus episodes, the pandemic super specials. And on the Patreon, I've been planning, and there's more in the works. I have some Patreon only mini episodes that are called So This Asshole, looking at various men in history, rereading through all the stuff about Queen Anne. I feel like her father, James II, would be a suitable subject for So This Asshole. So those are just on the Patreon page as well. Yeah. So my name is Anne Foster. This is the Vulgar History Podcast. I hope you're all doing well. I hope that these gossipy stories of history are a fun distraction for everybody, and I'll talk to you all next time. So you just heard my 2020 self list off a bunch of things, websites for merch stores, things like that. That's out of date. Here's the more recent information. So actually, first I want to say, so at the time I did this episode, I had not yet done like 200 others. So where Queen Anne fits now with her score of 29.5. And if you're interested in seeing the whole scandalicious scale, it is on my website, vulgarhistory.com. There's a thing at the top that says scores, and you can see the whole scale and link through to see what episode, to listen to the episodes in question. But so where she is, Queen Anne, 29.5. Same score, interestingly, as her. Again, not ancestor, but relative, Lady Jane Grey, also 29.5. Claire Claremont, also a scandalous type person, often misunderstood, 29.5. Lady Catherine Grey, Jane Grey's sister, the 29. Louisa May Alcott, 29. Hortense Mancini, a person who Anne might have known because she was a mistress of her uncle, Hot Charles, has a 29. Hatshepsut, a 29. Great company. Elagabalus, the teen trans Roman emperor, 29. Mary Shelley, 29. We've got a lot of 29s. Anyway, so that's the neighborhood Anne is in. And like, that's, you know how people say it's like dream blunt rotation? That kind of is. Like Lady Jane Grey, Claire Claremont, Queen Anne, Catherine Grey, Louisa May Alcott, Hortense Mancini, Hatshepsut, Elagabalus, Mary Shelley, Elizabeth Bathory. What a dinner party that would be. And so also I will let you know all the up-to-date information about me and the show, etc., and everything that's going on. So in the intervening 5 years since I recorded this episode the first time, you know, there's been many changes in the world. There's been many changes in the internet and how things are done. And what I'm doing lately is I have a mailing list, which is once a month, I will send you an email with all of the Anne updates. So if you're like me and trying to divest from just like social media and all the notifications of all the things, it's like you can get like one email once a month from me being like, hey, here's like 4 to 5 points of interest. That's it. It's not overwhelming. You can read it at your own leisure. And the way that you subscribe to that mailing list is go to vulgarhistory.com/news and you can join the waiting list. Not the waiting list, the mailing list. They come out about mid-month usually. And in there I'll have like the latest updates about, and the updates are getting fast and furious. Too fast, too furious, these updates. Because the book, it comes out in a year. Rebel of the Regency, the scandalous saga of Caroline of Brunswick, Britain's uncrowned queen. And lots of stuff coming up, lots of updates there. So I put those in the newsletter. I also mentioned the latest information about in-person events. Toronto, I haven't yet announced that yet, but like, I'm looking at you, Toronto. Highlights from what the podcast has been doing, and also my own personal book and movie and TV show and podcast recommendations. So again, sign up for that. The most low-key, no stress way to get information from me at your own pace. vulgarhistory.com/news is how you sign up for my mailing list. You can also follow me on Substack at vulgarhistory.substack.com. Every other week, I post essays about women from history. So if you want to keep Women's History Month vibes going, even not in the month of March, you can get all that content there. You can also follow me on Patreon at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. And that is where, again, I'm posting more stuff there because of social media is unpredictable. People can be mean. Algorithms make you not see stuff from people you're following. So this is where, like, if you literally want to follow what I'm talking about, that's where I'm posting my shit. Patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. You can follow for free there, get a free membership, and then you'll see just kind of the stuff I post there, just like updates about the book and like links about things that are interesting, and just like there's chats there. Like, that's where it's happening. And then if you want to also financially help me out a little bit there too and get a little more content, if you pledge $1 or more a month, you get early ad-free access to all episodes of Vulgar History. And you don't have to like go on Patreon to listen to the episodes. You can like sync it to wherever you get your podcasts from, Amazon Music or Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever. You can do that. If you pledge $5 or more a month, you get access to bonus episodes of Vulgar Peace Theater, where we have not, what we do on that show, which we haven't recorded for a while because I've been writing a book. Allison Epstein, my other co-host, has been writing a book. Lettawood Johnson, guess what? Writing a book. We haven't been able to do it, but we will again soon. And we have not yet done an episode about The Favorite, but maybe we will, now that Queen Anne is fresh in our minds again. So anyway, $5 a month, you get the bonus episodes. And also if you join the Patreon at $5 or more a month, you can also join our Discord, which is just like a giant group chat where we're all just like emotionally supporting each other, wishing each other happy birthday, sharing pictures of our pets, talking about Survivor, just like having a nice time. We also are partnered with Common Era Jewelry. I'm excited whenever there's like a specific overlap in what Common Era Jewelry has in their designs and the person we're talking about today. I will say Queen Anne was briefly famous around the time of the 2019 Oscars when The Favorite won some Oscars, but most people have forgotten about her by now. There's not a necklace with her face on it from Common Era Jewelry, but Common Era Jewelry does have necklaces with various other people's faces on. Hatshepsut, who I mentioned, being one of them. So this is a women-owned business that it's a small business. The pieces are made in New York City. Everyone involved has healthcare and good wages. It's a company that I feel good about being partnered with. And they have their latest collection, which is Zodiac Jewelry, inspired by a 17th century alchemical manuscript. These pieces are gorgeous and also kind of weird, like weird in a good way, kind of like conversation starters type things. More than adornment, these pieces are modern talismans, symbols of connection, intention, and the timeless magic of the stars. You can get Common Era's, they make beautiful pendants and also rings, and you can get their pieces in solid gold, as well as in more affordable gold vermeil. The gold vermeil Zodiac stuff is like on a wait list at this point, but join the wait list so you know when it's available. And then when you're buying it, or anything from Common Era, Vulgar History listeners always get 15% off everything from Common Era by going to commonera.com/vulgar or using code vulgar at checkout. If you want to rep your favorite podcast, if this is your favorite podcast and you want to rep your favorite podcast, I'm your favorite podcast's favorite podcast. Go to vulgarhistory.com/store. If you're in the US, that's where you can get some stuff. Or if you're outside the US, you can shop from our Redbubble store, which is vulgarhistory.redbubble.com. Get in touch with me. There's a form at vulgarhistory.com. It just says there, like when you go to vulgarhistory.com to see the scandiliciousness scale, click on scores and see those, and then click on contact me if you want to contact me for some reason. And I keep saying like I'm trying to divest from social media, but I'm still on social media. I'm trying to diversify what I'm doing. Anyway, I'm on various social media places like Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads. At Vulgar History Pod, you can DM me on Instagram as well. Next week, we're going to be having another blast from the past with some new connotations. And a week after that, guess what we're going to be doing? Diving back into the French Revolution. So I'm here every week with an episode for you. I love to hang out with you in your ear holes, and I'll talk to you all. Oh, keep your pants on and your tits out. Talk to you all next week when it will no longer be Women's History Month, but we carry it with us in our hearts always on this podcast. Vulgar History is researched, written, and hosted by Anne Foster. That's me. The editor is Christina Lumagi. Theme music is by the Severn Duo. The Vulgar History Show image is by Deborah Wong. Transcripts are written by Aveline Malik. Find transcripts of recent episodes at vulgarhistory.com.
What's up, fellow TV watchers? It's Brian from The Core Podcast, where we cover all things Apple TV+. We are wrapping up our recaps of Emmy favorite Severance, but 2025 on Apple TV Plus is just getting started. In April and May, The Core is recapping Seth Rogen's new Hollywood satire, The Studio, and Jon Hamm's dark comedy, Your Friends and Neighbors. We'll also be recapping the first 2 seasons of Apple's sci-fi thriller, Foundation, heading into the 3rd season of that later this year. Search for The Core, all things Apple TV Plus, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
Hi, this is Rob Benedict.
And I am Richard Spate. We were both on a little show you might know called Supernatural.
It had a pretty good run, 15 seasons, 327 episodes.
And though we have seen, of course, every episode many times, we figured, hey, now that we're wrapped, let's watch it all again.
And we can't do that alone. So we're inviting the cast and crew that made the show along for the ride. We've got writers, producers, composers, directors, and we'll of course have some actors on as well, including some certain guys that played some certain pretty iconic brothers.
It was kind of a little bit of a left field choice in the best way possible.
The note from Kripke was, he's great, we love him, but we're looking for like a really intelligent Duchovny type.
With 15 seasons to explore, it's going to be the road trip of several lifetimes. So please join us and subscribe to Supernatural then and now.
Can you actually change your personality if you want to? How does peer pressure work, and why is it so powerful? Should you ever really trust your gut when you make a big decision? These are just a few of the topics we've recently covered on my podcast, Something You Should Know. I'm the host, Mike Carruthers, and each episode of Something You Should Know covers multiple topics that are likely relevant to you. You'll discover things you can use in your life today, right now, like how to have a great conversation, how to be more courageous, the anatomy of the perfect apology, and much, much more. To date, there are over 1,000 episodes of Something You Should Know, and we've gotten over 4,000 mostly 5-star reviews. I invite you to check out Something You Should Know. Look for the bright yellow light bulb on the blue background. Something You Should Know, wherever you listen to podcasts.